Hit record. Great. Well, everyone, welcome to the Lunch and Learn wherever you are. I know some of you it might not be lunchtime yet. It certainly isn't for me. But we're going to be talking today about creating sales enablement content that converts. That's kind of why we're all here. Maybe just to start off with a couple of things around some of the topics that we'll be covering. So what we want to do basically is go over, all right, what is sales enablement content? What are we actually talking about here? Why should you invest in it? Why does it matter? I want to sort of share maybe 4 of the challenges that I've seen some of our clients in terms of how they've been approaching some of the sales enablement content, and how if you're experiencing some of those, maybe some of the ways that you can unblock that. Just sort of a very high level framework about how you can think about creating some of this sales enablement content, and then as I sort of mentioned at the start, I kind of want to open up a bit of a time at the end. So if you're working on stuff at the moment, or there's some challenges that you might have, there's a really good group of people on this call that I'm sure can answer that, and I'm happy to chip in and answer that myself. So that's basically what we'll be covering, and I'll be stopping along the way, just checking with you guys, make sure you're all happy. And as I mentioned, please do stop me if you want to put a finer point on anything or anything sort of not resonating. So let's jump in. So what is sales enablement content? So this isn't necessarily the most scientific definition, but the way I think of it is really sort of any content that your sales team is using to educate buyers during the sales process. And a lot of people, when they think of this, just think of it as white papers or case studies, but it's really any sort of content that helps you sort of scale the education process of a sales prospect as they're going through. This is something like very similar to content marketing. There's lots of literature out there on that. I think the main thing is that it's used specifically in the sales process, and it's normally being distributed via a sales rep, to a prospect, and all of that is sort of mediated through that relationship. So, it's much more than just white papers. Video content falls under this. Graphical content falls under this. Podcasts, anything that you do kind of in the audio space. There's some really exciting things happening in there as well, kind of falls under that. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the type of content that we're arming salespeople with in order to have those conversations and to educate buyers through that. So then, okay, why should you invest in it? Why does this matter? Why should you care? Well, there's a couple of things. One is we've basically found increasingly that buyers' attitudes and their willingness to engage with salespeople is changing. So, if you cast your mind back, to the 80s or 90s, and you think about all of kind of the sales movies, the Wolf of Wall Street and all this sort of thing, you sort of picture salespeople calling prospects who are sort of unaware that they have a problem, and then, convincing them of that problem, convincing them of the solution, their product, and taking them through to buying. It's kind of this very idealized sort of boiler room type thing. Modern sales is obviously so much different to that. And, what I guess the big thing there is around education. So if you're selling something that's very complex, maybe you're selling to a large business, maybe there are multiple decision makers, maybe it's just a complex product. People need to be educated in order to buy it and to work out whether or not is the right thing. Particularly in this kind of world of SaaS that I think a lot of us are in, if someone can buy your product, but if it doesn't suit them, they can just cancel over the first month or the first year in, which kind of ruins a lot of that sort of sales investment that you've made. But I think what that's leading to is obviously a lot of buyers that want to do their own research, form their own conclusions. Particularly in younger millennial buyers, like we don't want to talk to a salesperson until we absolutely desperately have to. And this is kind of where the rise of the sales enablement content has come through, because you can educate buyers at scale and give them content that they can sort of consume in their own time, and then they can come to you when it's time to actually answer anything that's outside of that, or to take them through that process. So yeah, I just wanted to put this right at the start in terms of, right, what are we talking about here? And why should you care about it? What I'll do now is just go through some of the challenges, just making sure everyone's all happy from their side?
All good.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so challenge one, one of the things we see a lot is sort of failing to meet buyers at their level of awareness. So what do I mean by level of awareness? So this is the 5 levels of customer awareness. This is probably out of a marketing book, Marketing 101. You'd be probably pretty familiar with this, at least conceptually. But we see basically 5 stages, going from being unaware of a problem. So this is where someone, you'll try to sell them your product and they'll say, why are you even talking to me about this? I don't even have that problem. So this is, I guess, a big part of the market who may not even know you exist, and they've never decided to look for something because they don't even know they have a problem. At a certain point, either through stumbling across it themselves or coming into contact with some marketing or sales material, they'll become problem aware, which basically means they now realize they have a problem, but they're not really at a point where they know how to solve it. So they might be sort of stumbling around trying to find different ways that they can kind of mitigate that. Is it a problem they could actually solve? Once they've basically decided around that, they enter this sort of solution aware space. And it's worth noticing here that solution doesn't mean your product. It just means any solution that could solve it. And this is really where salespeople earn their salt, because they're going and basically helping buyers work out, okay, what's the most appropriate solution to solve this problem? So that's basically being in that solution aware. Then if we move past that and we've decided, okay, we're going to talk about our product or one of our competitors' products, we're in that product aware space. And this is really the back end of the sales process here. So this is basically, we're talking about features and benefits and comparing our product to our competitors. And then, hopefully they become a customer and they kind of fall into this most aware thing, either because they've gone really deep into the sales cycle and decided not to buy, or they're a customer, but they have a very intricate knowledge of what our particular solution is, how it can solve their problem. And at that point, we've sort of done most of everything we can do. It's just basically around timing and fit around that. So hopefully you're familiar with that, but it's really important to understand, because this is really where we can fall down, because if we're not creating sales enablement content that is specifically targeted to their level of awareness, it almost doesn't matter how good it is. If you're in that unaware stage and I'm throwing white papers at you, you don't even know you have a problem. So, you're certainly not going to invest as much time if I'm asking you to read a whole white paper, to go through all of that and look at the sort of nuances of our product, particularly say if we're asking you to compare 2 products together. It's just like not going to be relevant for you at all. So the goal really is to target it at one of those levels of awareness in order to move them up the rung of the next onto that ladder. So taking them from unaware to problem aware, or from problem aware to solution aware. And obviously the whole point of this is to take people through it at their own pace and to educate them so they feel like they've kind of bought into the sales process. And I think a big part of this as well is to consider, okay, what is the time and attention investment that they're making? So if they're at the unaware stage and we're throwing big text heavy things at them, we're asking them to watch 30-minute, 1 hour sort of demonstration videos, they're just not going to want to invest that because they don't see it being valuable to them. So this is basically where we need to match, okay, what are we asking for in terms of their time and attention, and seeing if we can lower that, but also matching that to the level of awareness. So the more aware they are of their own problem and the pains, then the better that's going to land for them. So if you had to take anything from that, try to aim that stuff at that level of awareness and be sort of specific around it, because if you don't do this right, everything else kind of doesn't even matter at this point. So challenge 1 is meeting them at that level of awareness. Challenge 2 is really where we see the whole sales enablement process kind of becoming dislodged from any sort of sales strategy or a sort of target in terms of like sales performance. So this is really basically where the marketing team goes away and they come up with a bunch of sales enablement content, and then the sales team never uses it because it doesn't actually solve their challenges. And I think for us and what we try to really push clients to do, and I think what just makes the most sense is if you're doing sales enablement, what are you enabling? You need to basically look at the sales process. So take your CRM, your sort of Kanban, and you lay it out, and all the different steps in there. What is the actual metric that we are sort of improving here? Can we, for instance, target our sales enablement content at a particular stage in the pipeline? And that can broadly map onto those levels of awareness as well. But if we do that, it starts massively aligning sales and marketing efforts, as we'll see. So, one of the things that we feel very strongly about is, all sales enablement content should move the needle. So, you're going to go off, if you're going to produce some piece of content, that's an investment in your time and, probably the marketing team's time as well. You're going to write a bunch of content, get some graphics done up. You'll probably do some extensive research with customers. You'll talk to the sales team, and you're making an investment, which is essentially a bet that you'll be able to improve some part of the sales performance. So, what that sort of implies is, okay, if we're going to create a piece of content, what we really should do is attach some sort of outcome to it, and a KPI. And those KPIs can be qualitative and quantitative. But if you can kind of get into that frame of mind, you're immediately creating that alignment between sales and marketing, which I think people on both sides of the fence are constantly complaining about. So, say for a particular outcome, so say there was a stage in your sales pipeline where people book a demonstration, and then after a certain amount of time, they drop off. So say they don't sit the demonstration, and you never hear from them again. And say we have a thesis that we can create maybe a piece of content that preps them for the demo, or basically explains what we're doing in a bit more detail to make them more likely to show up on that. Ideally, we have some sort of KPI, which is the sit rate that increases out of that. But maybe the qualitative one is that when we're speaking to people on the demo, they actually mention that, okay, that was actually really helpful, and that was one of the reasons why I jumped on this, or they are more aware of the sorts of pains and they ask less kind of distracting or questions that would basically indicate that they're not quite there and ready yet with the problem. So that's kind of the goal. But I was just making a point here that even if you can't really measure the outcome, maybe through statistical significance, or it's just hard because there's too many other factors, it's still just good to have that kind of way of thinking, so that we're actually sitting down and having a plan about how this is going to impact this stuff. Because what we want to do is create that alignment between marketing, who's normally the one that create this content, and sales, who are the ones that use it. If we don't do that, we're going to be on both sides of the fence, kind of arguing with each other, and ultimately we'll probably blame the marketing team for wasting all of that resource. So I would just say, if you're not already doing this, think about it. One way that you could basically start putting this into practice right away is, if you've already got some quote unquote sales enablement content, start by thinking about, okay, what stage of the pipeline do we use this in? And why are we using it, and what are some of the actual sales numbers that we expect this to sort of move the needle on? So, I mean, most of this stuff is probably at the front end of your sales process, but even just kind of mapping out, okay, what do we expect this to actually improve? That'll kind of start building in some of that discipline. And then for new content, you can do this. So go through, be like, okay, we've got a particular stage in the sales pipeline that things are falling down. We have this hypothesis that if we educate buyers in a new or different way, we'll improve that. And we're willing to bet, willing to invest X amount in order to solve that problem. And if you can frame the problem, then you can essentially get out of the way. So you can give that to whoever's producing it, the marketing team, or even if that's someone sort of embedded in sales, and say, this is the outcome we want. This is what we're seeing. we will give this to you to go and run with, but we're all all pulling in the same direction in terms of those KPIs. So that's one thing that you can start doing right away. I'm going to go on to the third challenge, but I will just check in with you all again. You're all with me, maybe spotting one or two of these things that you might be doing or hopefully not doing. All good? Okay. All right, so challenge number 3, and that one is sort of picking the right medium for your message. And I sort of foreshadowed that right at the start of this, which was basically that, when a lot of people think about sales enablement content, we think of text-based PDFs that we're sending to people. And sorry, I just had Will jumping out there. So yeah, text-based stuff, but we don't know that's not the only thing that we can be producing. And it's also, for other reasons, like we talked about before in terms of the time and their attention investment, lots of reasons why we might want to create it in other forms. So what you want to do basically is pick the right medium for your message. And there's lots of stuff here. We talked about documents, we talked about videos, podcasts, sort of audio type things, graphics. All of that stuff are sort of tools in your tool bag. But sort of how do you know which one to use? What's sort of in your capability to produce? That's really going to be sort of down to you and what we're sort of exploring here. So the medium sort of shapes your message. So what we basically need to do is work out, all right, what is the level of awareness that we're sort of targeting? Because we know that people at a lower level of awareness, maybe earlier on in the sales cycle, will be less likely to spend the time and the attention that they need to consume some of our lengthier content, right? So to do this effectively, we basically need to work out, okay, what's the right medium to deliver that? So that could be, bias more towards, say, short video content or graphics or GIFs or something like that. We're seeing the rise in sales teams of voice notes on LinkedIn and recorded short videos that sort of build engagement, but also they're punchier, they can carry more information, and it's less sort of onerous on them to consume that. So I would just say to you in this very short section here is, don't limit yourself in terms of the medium that you use. So balance that with the time and attention that it takes and the engagement and pain. Because clearly, if they're further on in the sales cycle, they're more bought in, the pain is realer for them. They'll read a white paper, they'll read a case study, all of that's totally fine. But I guess for these people that are stuck at the front end of this cycle, then this is something you should consider as well. One thing that massively helps with this, and we found a lot this, even just with some of the stuff that we do at SeedLever, this is where content sort of repurposing is really, really effective. So, say if you're able to go and produce some high quality video content, or even say something like this, or some of the interview series that that we run, that's something that can very easily be converted across into audio content. So you can see that, syndicate that across into podcasts. You can then summarize that, so you can produce articles, how-to guides. It's very easy then to take that and sort of turn that into packaged content or downloadable content that you could be sending out. But in the same way, if you have sort of written content, you can then sort of wrap that up into infographics, GIFs, all those sorts of things. Like particularly now, in this age of trying to sell in an omni-channel way, we basically want to have content that we can share with people when we're doing our social selling, and we can be sort of using that across mediums. So if it's not something that you're that adept at, I would say just take the content that you already have and work out how to repurpose it into a form that will maybe be slightly more palatable for people at the start, or even you can combine content or sort of remix it so that you're adding in more value for people kind of further along at the end. So yeah, getting good at this is going to be extremely helpful for you as well. Right. And then the fourth challenge here, I would say, is building living content. And I'll explain what I mean by that is basically continuously developing, continuously updating the content so that you can basically adapt to the changing objectives on the ground in terms of the sales cycle. So what we sort of say and a big believer in is sort of your content is never finished. So you need to keep it alive. I have a very corny sort of approach here to these animations. Sorry about that. But basically, what I'm sort of getting at here is, what we often think about is, okay, we've done a white paper, we've done a case study, maybe there's a blog, maybe there's a video. That's kind of a finished product. And when we're thinking about new content, like we're going to go and often do something else. If you kind of view it as a tool that you have to impact the sales process, then you should be in a position to update it if anything changes on the ground. So say the amount of the objections that you're having are changing. You can sort of repurpose that content or pivot it slightly so that you're being more direct with that. So your content is basically, it's never done, it's never finished. It's basically a sort of living well, if you will, of information that you can constantly repurpose, constantly update. Particularly as you're starting to use this content, prospects are reacting to it. You're learning more about what mediums work best. You're getting better at sort of producing, repurposing it. So essentially what this implies is, all right, well, the content you've produced in the past isn't going to be fit for purpose in the future, but that's totally fine because we're constantly updating them and maintaining that. So what you'll want to do here, if you want to keep it fresh, is basically maintain some sort of versioning system and sort of get into the habit of writing down, okay, why did we update this content? So was there a new competitor that entered the market that, for instance, we wanted to position ourselves against? Or, probably the biggest one, is there a new feature in our software? Or is it something we're doing differently? Or are we changing our pricing model? All of that sort of stuff means that the content should change. And, this is something that people hate, like particularly, around help site documentation. It's always absolutely a nightmare to maintain, and particularly if you're in a fast moving software business that's constantly updating it. But use that as if you no longer see them as fixed assets, and you kind of see them as wells of information, then that's actually a real asset to you because you can quickly change them and you can start using them in different ways in the sales process. So kind of what would underpin this is implementing some sort of content management system. And I've said content management system because I don't really have a view of what you should use. You're probably happy with what you use. It might just be organizing some of this stuff in Google Docs maybe, or in HubSpot in your CRM. Maybe you've got a bespoke system for this. That's totally cool. But have some sort of way of organizing it and versioning it, because the worst thing that you want here, and probably one of the most frustrating things for salespeople, is updating content and then they might have something locally in their on their computer, or something in their email that they pull out and kind of forward off to people. If you can make it really easy to just update everything and have it be seamless, then you're going to get a lot less blowback from the rest of the organization when you're updating documents to take into account the changing reality on the ground there. So whatever your system is, have a think about how that can scale and how that can help you craft new content and deliver it in an engaging way. So then, final bit, I'm gonna go through this framework for building content that converts. How are we all doing there? We've gone through the challenges, so hopefully there's some stuff in there that you can see.
Yep. Good.
All good?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, this is sort of where rubber meets the road a little bit, and this is one way that you can start thinking about building content that converts. There's sort of two frameworks here. So the first one is thinking about the sort of jigsaw pieces, if you will, of any sort of sales enablement content that you're producing. And very, very simple. It's these 4 things. The problem. So this is basically as the name suggests, the problem that we're trying to solve that the buyer is experiencing. And when you think about the problem, think about it in terms of what is standing in the way of them achieving some outcome or some value, which is number 4 on this list. So these things are inherently linked together. So often people they have something that they want to do better in their business. They want to achieve some positive outcome. There are probably a range of problems that are stopping that from happening. And that's kind of at the start of this, right at the start of the kind of awareness cycle, that's really kind of where we want to be targeting the stuff. And then we get to the solution. And when I say the solution, that's not your product. So that's any of the ways that a prospect could solve that problem in order to realize that value or that outcome. So you'll need to be addressing that. And then your product. So what are we selling people? How are we positioning it? How are we explaining it? There are sort of 4 elements of that to any sort of sales enablement content. But the thing I'd stress here is you don't need to have all 4 elements in every piece of content that you produce. In fact, you probably shouldn't, depending on their level of awareness or where they're at kind of in the sales cycle. And I'll show you in a bit just how you can sort of combine some of these things so that you can make some of the stuff a bit more effective. So as an example, you can start playing around with these 4 variables, and I've got some examples here. But yeah, you can think about, for instance, combining the problem, the solution, the product, and the outcome in some of your sales enablement content. So what that would look like would be your standard white papers, case studies, taking the full gamut through. Okay, what problem are we solving here, and what's the real value we're producing? Of all the solutions, why should you pick our solution, and basically why is our product kind of the best in the market? That can tend to be a very sort of meaty document if you do that. That's really something that I think would go to people further on in the sales cycle who are at least probably problem or solution aware. That's kind of like a big undertaking to get someone to sort of digest all of that. But if they are down there and you want to get all the information in there and give the full sort of value proposition, that's basically what you'd be doing. But there are other ways to do it. So for instance, you could omit the product entirely. So if you've got someone who's maybe unaware or has less awareness, they don't really want to hear about why your product is better than the competitor, because they're not even necessarily sure they have a problem. So you can basically produce some really effective sales enablement content by just explaining what the problem is that they might be experiencing, explaining the range of solutions that they could explore, and what the outcome would be of picking type of solution. So say if it's for, I don't know, they've got a problem, business has got a problem, they're not getting enough leads, they might pick a lead generation software. You're not necessarily saying they should pick yours. But you're basically saying that these are the type of outcomes you can get if you do that, and they should basically speak to you in order to start working out, okay, which product and which solution kind of is best for them. So that's can be very effective at the start. You can have ones where you're just basically talking about the problem and the outcome. This is probably used sparingly, but what it can do is build intrigue. So if you're basically just saying, there's a business here that's had this problem and we help them solve it, and this is what the outcome was, they'll be asking, okay, well, but how did you do that? Like, how did you produce that kind of outcome for them? And for someone, that might just be enough to give them a bit of a hook to enter into the sales process and start talking to a salesperson. Obviously, you'll want to be there to follow up with the solution pretty quickly and the product. But it can be an interesting combination of those. And then, finally, if you've got someone who is really far down the sales cycle, you might not even necessarily talk about the solution. they're at the point where they're evaluating different lead generation softwares. So you don't need to convince them to get a lead generation software or why that is the right one. You can just be talking about, okay, what's the problem? How is our product the best at solving that problem? And what is the outcome? So you can think about, depending on the level of awareness, playing around with those variables and not feeling that you need to sort of include everything in one in order to sort of convince them. But that's basically something that you can do on there. The final point is just sort of laying out those levels of awareness again and thinking about, okay, how do we create content that can basically take people from one level of awareness to the next? So if we think about the sort of unaware to problem aware jump, if you think about it in the mind of the buyer, they weren't aware they had a problem, and then they engage with some sort of sales enablement content that you've produced. Now they know they have a problem, right? And that's like I think a big jump, probably the biggest one in terms of actually bringing people into the sales process. So what can we do here to get them to that stage, and how can we balance it in terms of not asking for too much of their time and attention in doing that? The second one is that jump between problem aware and solution aware. So they're going to, once they have a problem, things start to snowball here, because if it's a big enough problem, they have a big enough pain, they're going to want to know how to solve it. So you have to be basically ready to provide them with some sort of solution, because you've built up probably a bit of angst in them and they want to work out how to solve it. So how can we do that? And then how can we move them through solution aware to the product aware stuff? And you can start to see, if you're able to kind of drop in and use your content to move people through these levels of awareness and kind of change their mind or teach them something, this is really kind of where salespeople are going to do their best work. So if you take someone who's unaware and a salesperson potentially cold calls them or they're cold emailing them, that's going to have very little impact on them. But if they've just moved into that problem aware space, that is going to open up a conversation with a salesperson. And this is where a salesperson will really earn their money there, is that basically getting into this problem aware space and helping them work out the range of possible solutions. Once they're sort of exploring that space, we need to be ready with content again, because we need to help them work out what is the right solution. Our product might not even be in the category of solution that they need, but we should do our homework and quickly qualify them out if we know we're not going to be able to help them. But the content will help sort of get them to that stage. And then, once we're sort of getting into this product aware space, we really want stuff that can help us position against competitors. They're gonna, if we're kind of first to market in a way, and we've kind of helped them get from this unaware space to here, we own the conversation. So we can position our product against competitors very easily, but they may go out and do their own due diligence. They may jump on demos with our competitors. I think anyone working in sales has probably experienced this. So we want to basically make sure that, okay, we're getting the talking points and we're getting the value that we kind of uniquely add to them in front of them and educating them on that. Otherwise, we've basically done all of this work to bring them to the point where they're willing to solve that problem, only to have them go over to a competitor. So those are two frameworks that you can use there, thinking about those 4 variables that you've got. So the problem, the solution, the outcome, and the product, and not feeling that you need to use kind of all 4 of those at all times. Like, use them strategically, and then think about, okay, how does that actually line up with the sales process? And can you basically align them at a certain level of awareness that then opens up a conversation with a salesperson? So, team, that is what I had for you today. I hope that's been helpful. At this stage, I am going to stop, if I can, the recording.